Welcome everybody to the Plugin Kitchen, coding a custom plugin and putting it in the mix. I'm Christoph Thompson. I chair the Matlab design competition and the Sol Walker student design competition. I'm a vice chair of the audio education committee through which we run all these competitions. With me is Paul Willie Green Womack, a recording engineer who's going to put the plugin in the mix, and then we have Chris Bennett from Frost Miami, who's going to build the plugin for us right here. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about what we'll do here. So, Matlab is software that allows you to compile a plugin that you can then run in a DAW, just as any other plugin. It'll be standalone. Once you've compiled it, you don't need Matlab anymore. And so what we'll do today is we'll show you a really great on-ramp, both from an educational standpoint and from a coding standpoint, to build your own plugin, the things you'll need to know. It'll give you a really great idea of how to prep best for the hackathon. And it's going to be a surprisingly good, very good plugin. It's production ready. Paul used it in a mix. Sounds fantastic. So it'll really give you a great idea on the capabilities of what you can do with Matlab. I can talk about the prizes for the Matlab Hackathon. The first prize is $2,000. Second prize, $1,000. Third prize, $750. It consists of a challenge that'll be presented, for which you have 24 hours. The last one we did in Madrid. The next one will be again hosted in the US. The dates will be given soon. And the second this works, I'll project up also a QR code where you guys can fill out an interest form, and that'll help you guys to stay in touch with me and to always get updates on important information that pertains to the hackathon.
Yeah, so our experiment that we've done to display today is basically taking a custom plugin designed by Chris and then given to me, the non-programming engineer, and kind of that process of, I'm lucky I get a custom plugin that I get to play with, but also giving feedback and going back and forth and finding real-world uses for these plugins, right? Because my bar that I set when I'm testing something is, can I use it on a real record, right? It's great to have a cool thing that's really neat but doesn't have real-world application, but that only gets you but so far. I'm very lucky that my work schedule is busy. I don't have a lot of practice time or test time, so if I'm using something, it needs to be able to work on a real record immediately. And in this case, CSP is the channel strip processor. That's the plugin that we're dealing with. I had an album that was ready to go. Well, in fact, I had two. I don't even know if I told you this part, because I had this very nice jazz album that I was working on, wonderful singer named Jeanette Barry, ballads, lush arrangements, all this kind of stuff. And I tried the first version of CSP, and this is an aggressive plugin, right? This is very forward, and basically not for jazz ballads. But it's like watching a pilot of a TV show. You can't just watch the first episode. You got to get into episode 2 to see how things evolve. And it didn't work on the first thing that I applied it to, but it doesn't mean that the tool doesn't work. I just needed the right platform for it. So I had a very different project, aggressive hip-hop album, kind of thing that I usually work on, really Public Enemy inspired, aggressive samples, turntables, hard rhymes, and I needed something that could match that energy. And this is one of those cases, you put a plugin on something and then you hear it and you're like, oh, and that magic moment is like, oh, this is the right thing for this. How do I dial this in? How do I get that going? Do we have just an audio? Do we have the 3.5? Can I just plug in and play a little bit of what I was given from my client and then work through my process, and then we can look at how you created the tool and kind of our back and forth on how we developed. Well, you developed it and I sent you emails.
Yeah, no, but that was the fun part, right? The notes. Mm-hmm. And that's what would jazz me up and keep me up at night of, hey, how can I put this in to make Paul happy? Really, it was my end goal.
It's the most important thing. Thank you. Because testing it, I'm like, okay, well, this is a new tool, and no one plugin can do everything, no matter what they say in their social media posts and advertisements, right? Nothing does everything, but does it do the right thing for what I need right now? And that, to me, is the most important question. So, wait, where are you? I'm gonna hit play, and we're gonna see what happens. First thing, this is a plugin demonstration, but I'm a mixer, so we talk a little mix stuff. So the first thing you do when you get files in from a client to mix, all right? You've been hired, you got the gig, they send you the files, you put them in the DAW. What's the first thing that you do when you get started? Listen. Even before the Unity, the first thing I want a rough mix from every client that sends me their record. And that's really important here today. I want a rough mix so I can understand what my client has been living with. Because it could be, they could have written the song 2 weeks ago, they could have written the song 2 years ago, and they have an idea of what this sounds like. I want to start my mix from there. So I'm going to hit play, and this is a bit of the demo, the rough mix of Third Rail Blues. The artist is a client of mine named Kill Spector. This is Third Rail Blues.
Well, I'm bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a filthy ass world, trying to get in good with the rap girls. It's hard below boulevards, yards of glass shards, and torn up baseball cards. Severed heads levitate above a light source. Came for drinks, but wound up the main course. Words kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds that feed in the background. The last kid went out like a bug zapper. The Red Sea's burning, I saw his brain matter. If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night. If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night.
So we'll hold up there for a second. So you get the idea. Drum loops, break beats, aggressive guitars come in and the chorus. Is that bass that sounds like your speaker's blowing up, but it's not really blowing up. That's the kind of sound that like make you think everything's broken, but I did that on purpose. And then we've got this aggressive vocal, definitely Chuck D inspired, that kind of thing. But because my clients love me, and I love them back, when I got the files from Kill, he sent them to me all dry, unprocessed, which is what's ideal, because I want to be able to use the tools that I have to do my best work. That's a cool rough. It's also super compressed, and the balances are a little here and there, and it's a cool rough. I like the energy, but that's not a record. So dry files, they sent me this. So this is just faders up, and I want to start to match things to that reference, but this is just faders up, dry. So just listen off top. Bass is cool, but I need a little more bite to that.
Here's a little story that must be told.
Well, I'm bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a filthy ass world, trying to get in good with the rap girls. It's hard below boulevards, yards of glass shards, and torn up baseball cards. Severed heads levitate above a light source. Came for drinks, but wound up the main course. Words kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds that feed in the background. The last kid went out like a bug zapper. The Red Sea's burning, I saw his brain matter. If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night. If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night.
Okay, so same song, same elements, but that's not the same attitude. That's not the same aggression. That's like, okay, yeah, you're rapping. Okay, we're hearing the raps. That's not third rail blues. That's electric, right? The third rail. So what can I do to get these dry tracks from, yeah, okay, cool, whatever, to, okay, this is a record that we're going to have an impact with. And those tools are going to be on input 3 over there. The tools that, I've got a long list of plugins that I've collected, but that's not the exercise here, and that's not the fun part. So in talking to Chris, What you got? What do you have that can take these ho-hum tracks to be in your face and where they need to really be?
I'll talk about the competition for a minute, and then I'll go straight to Chris.
Let's do it.
All right, looks like projector's back on, so I'll talk about the competition side of things real quick and give you guys some information. I'll make it really quick because I would want to see what Chris has for us. So the AS Matlab Hackathon is for students. You have to be a student to participate. The good news is, if you're within a year of graduation, so let's say you're really strong at audio DSP and you're still within a year of graduation, you can still participate. Here's how the format works. On the morning of the day, we present the challenge. We give you a basic framework of what it is. So you always get a stack of code that will already run, and then we'll ask you for specific modifications for which you have 24 hours. It's set for 24 hours so that people in different time zones can all participate. You submit online, and then we'll announce the winners. The challenge is always a coding challenge given by some industry presenter in the morning. It's been carefully designed, reviewed from a technical education standpoint. It is so that an intermediate student can get something out of it, but if you're really strong, then the horizon is really open for you to customize it as needed. We give you code literature, test signals, and all that. That's distributed along with the challenge. And if you go to AS Students, I'll give you a QR code in a second. That's where you'll find all relevant materials. The requirements: you have to be a student member of the AS. You have to be enrolled in a student program. If you're submitting as a team, then you have to make sure that the rest of the team is on board with it. You submit your project description electronically according to the submission guidelines. And we judge in the following way. We look at the fulfillment of the coding challenge, the technical merit, degree of innovation, creative value, and the execution and cleanliness of the code. First prize, $2,000. Second prize, $1,000. Third prize, $750, underwritten by our sponsor, MathWorks. If you want to fill out this form, then you're in my database, and I will send you updates and various other things. So if you want to scan this real quick and fill out that form, then we'll make sure you have a spot to participate in the hackathon. And if you go to asstudents.org, that's where you can review all the rules and regulations for this. All right, with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Bennett, and he's going to start building this plugin for us.
All right, let me get you guys started off with resources. If you go to, I gotta get the display up. If you go to bennettaudio.com, all the code that I'm going to show you today, is available for download. It's all free. It's a GitLab repository. BennettAudio.com. And so you'll see these files here. You'll scroll down to Channel Strip plugin, and then you'll see all these files. I've got this whole today's session broken up into all these individual files: template, simple gain, adding the GUI, adding the multi-band parametric EQ. So you can see every single step of the way what we're building together here. All right, so that's my plug for that. Let's jump right into Matlab. Look, you all have, I saw everybody raise their hand. You all have Matlab. Make sure you have the audio toolbox installed. You're gonna need that, because one of the things that ships with the audio toolbox is this really great package called an audio plugin. All right, it's fantastic. Who comes up with these names? But it's wonderful, because even if you've never done object-based programming, developed a class in Matlab, that's a little more advanced. You don't really have to know those concepts to jump right into it. All you have to do is inherit, and you're going to come up with your own plugin name. I'm getting you started off with a template here that has all the basic stuff. So we're going to say, hey, we're going to make a MATLAB-defined audio plugin. We're going to make our own version of it called the CSP template here. You've got a few sections that you have to fill out. Some of the sections are your variables. You know what these are. It's the gain. It's the frequency cutoff. These are the things that you know. And some of those variables are even going to be withheld, right? So internal stuff, filter variables, filter states that you just don't need to share with the outside world. You're going to have a section where you can do all of your initialization. So this is all the stuff that you need to load up before the plugin GUI appears to the user. here's the real fun part, right? The processor. This is where you can apply all of your effects, and we're gonna use some really cool built-in Matlab effects today. So we're not gonna write custom DSP. I've got a whole list. I've got a list of a dozen effects that are built into Matlab as system objects. I'm gonna show those to you today. And then if we have any additional methods that we need to write, updating filter coefficients, you name it. We've got a whole section down here for all of our methods. You can see this keyword up here called methods. So we have a section where we can put all of our functions. All right, so that's the template. So let's get started. Let's see how easy it is to just get a gain going. We're gonna have this going in 60 seconds. We gotta start off with the parameter. Now this is just a convention that I like to use. I like to use all capitals for my variable names that are tied to an actual tunable parameter. Then they jump out to me. It's like, well, this is something the user's touching. So we're gonna make a property called that. Now, so that the host can see your plugin, we have to make something known as the plugin interface. It can eventually hold a lot of information like who the developer is, that's you, the name of your plugin, what version it is, how many channels you support, and all of the parameters that are inside. Now, has anyone here done plugin development before? Okay, fewer than Matlab, so you already know some of these basics about an interface. Well, it's super simple with Matlab. We have to make something called a plugin interface, and we're going to use Matlab's function here, audio plugin interface. We are going to just start real simple. We're just going to start by listing the parameters that we have available. Well, I made a variable called gain, so let's make a gain parameter, okay? So these are called plugin parameters. All right. The first thing that a parameter needs is it needs a name. So this is where we link the physical knob that we're creating to this variable, right? These two need to be able to know who they are. So I'm going to make this match. My caps lock will turn on. I'm going to make this match the name of the variable that I put up here. All right. From there, we need to let the user know the name of this. Otherwise, they'll just see a blank knob. So we're going to give it what's called a display name. And this one I'm going to call my gain. From there, we're going to give it we can give a label. You don't always need a label, but in this case, we do. We want something, we're going to call this gain in dB. So we're eventually going to have to convert this to a scale factor, right? And last but not least is just like the minimum requirements of what's required for a parameter, an audio plugin parameter. We also need a mapping. So your typical ones are going to be either linear, that's appropriate for dB, logarithmic, that's appropriate for frequency, and then you can also do what's called enumerated, so it's just going to be kind of like a selector. So I'm going to do a mapping here that is linear, and now we're going to give it a range. So for now, I'm just going to start from -12 to +12 dB, and so that is the end of my plugin parameter, and for now that's going to be the end of my audio interface. So I've got one parameter set up. Now, right now, we need to make what's called a setter function. So every control needs to have a setter, and then the getter is going to be implicit. We actually don't have to define that within the Matlab environment. So down here inside my method section, I'm just going to make a new function called set.gain. Every setter takes in a pointer to the plugin, and it takes in a value that it gets from the controller. And so all we're going to do is we're going to say, when I say plugin dot, I'm saying that's like in other programming languages that might be this. Have you heard of that keyword this? So it's kind of like that. It's a pointer to the object itself. So we're going to say plugin dot gain equals this new value that's coming. So anytime someone touches one of those control knobs, this setter is going to get called. And we're going to assign this over to our internal property called gain. You can do other stuff in here as well. All right, so that's the simplest plugin we can create. And if we launch this tool, oh, I love it. It's called Audio Test Bench. Thank you, Matlab. you're going to get this wonderful environment here. Here's the simple gain. We'll see if audio is running. Matlab has a bunch of test audio that you can load up. You just click over here on this little tool button here, and I don't know why we're not getting audio. Anyway, this is where you can try out. This is where you can try out your plugin without actually converting it to a VST yet. If you want to take it the step further, you can pull up this Generate Audio Plugin button. All right. Check this out. You can select, might be me. You can select the type of plugin you want to create. VST, VST3, Audio Unit V3, which runs on iOS devices, so things like iPad, iOS, iPhone. A standalone executable. This is really wonderful for testing out your GUI before bringing it actually into a DAW. Or if you're really adventurous, you can actually export this as a juice project. And you can go in and you can tweak the code, doing things that are beyond the capabilities of Matlab here. That's going to take a few minutes, so we're going to skip that for now. So the next step in building this audio plugin, we've got a simple gain, fine. Let's add one of these system objects I was telling you about. So check this out. Matlab has all these runtime objects. Crossover filters, multi-band parametric EQ, all sorts of filters actually. Compressor and limiter, expander noise gate, reverb, pitch shift, automatic gain control, chorus, echo, flanger, and some other various utilities. So for this channel strip plugin, I'm going to use the multi-band parametric EQ. We're going to go 3 bands, low shelf, high shelf, and then a bell in the middle. I'm going to add a compressor in there. And on the back end, we're going to have a little bit of reverb, which actually sounds pretty nice. So I'm going to show you how to implement those 3 right now. So to get started, you know what? I'd like to start with the parameters. Let's start adding those in, right? So let's, to keep things simple, let's start with just a shelf, right? And then I'll jump forward to all the other bands already added in. But we know we're going to need a couple things. We know that we're going to need a gain, and we know that we're going to need a cutoff frequency. And we can give that some default value. So now those exist as variables. We need to jump down into our parameters, and we can start thinking about, well, what do we want the range of these values to be, the mapping, and how are they going to work together? Because this is not just a single band, right? We've got a few that all need to interact. There's going to be some overlap. So let's create an audio plugin parameter. And so remember, step 1, we got to tie this to one of our variable names. So we made our low shelf frequency, for example. Next, we need to give it a label. What do we want the user to see? So we'll say, hey, this is our low shelf frequency cutoff. We need to let the user know if this has any units, right? So we're going to give this a unit of hertz. And last but not least, we've got to think about how do we want this thing mapped. So we're going to want this as a probably logarithmic based. It's going to feel right for the user. Otherwise, if you go linear with frequency, it's going to feel like you have no control over the low end. And then once you get to the high end, it's going to feel like the whole knob is just controlling the high end. So logarithmic is definitely appropriate for frequency. You guys know about the 3 dots? That lets you continue a statement on another line. So I do that just for visual purposes. So when I'm looking, everything looks clean, even though I'm doing this fast and it's not clean. So what might be an appropriate start and end frequency for a low shelf? We might want to go as low as 20 or 30 hertz, maybe up to what? Yeah, a couple hundred, something like that. All right. So that's how we add a new parameter. We would then jump down. This is where it gets fun. We need to create a new object. This is a system object. This is something that we set up before the plugin launches, and it's going to exist throughout the duration of the plugin, and then we're going to be able to interact with it asynchronously while audio is passing through. This is a really wonderful thing about the system objects. So we need to come up with a name for our system object that our plugin's going to hold on to, and we're just going to call it EQ for now. When we come down here, we need to say EQ equals, this is going to be Matlab's name. Look at this, multiband parametric EQ. And we have to set it up with a few things. To get started, we need to let it know the sample rate. We're just going to grab that straight from our plugin. So this is actually going to like a getter function. I mentioned that variables have getters and setters, so we're going to get the sample rate from our plugin. We need to let it know the number of EQ bands. Now, I told you this is a 3-band, but Matlab treats shelves a little bit differently. So since we only have one sweeping bell in the middle, this is actually going to be just 1 band, according to Matlab here. And we're going to let it know, though, that it has a high shelf and it's got a low shelf as well. So we'll turn those on. And has high shelf. There we go. That's all it takes to set up the system object inside your initializer here. So look at this. You see how this is the same name as my plugin up here? Look, I'm inheriting from audio plugin. It's called a CSP Simple Gain. This is the constructor. You guys know what a constructor is? It happens right, it's the code that's called right when the object launches. All right, so inside that constructor, we're setting up our system object. And it's an EQ, a multiband parametric EQ. Look how simple this is to implement. We're going to say our output is what? It's not just the input times the gain anymore. We're going to say it's our plugin dot EQ. That's how we access our system object here. And we're just going to pass it the input times the gain. Look at that. No DSP. That's all we have to do. Sorry, this makes me real happy. We're also going to have to set setter functions for all of our knobs. Let's take a look at what this is going to look like once we're all done. It's going to be a little bit ugly, actually. Because look at this. If we don't have a GUI set up yet, Matlab's just going to give us a list of sliders. Yes, they're going to have all of the names that we want to show. Yes, they're going to have all of the labels, which is nice. I should have audio running now. So we need to do something to make it pretty, right? So setting up the GUI is going to be the next step. So what else do we want? I said we want a multiband parametric EQ, we want a compressor, and we want some reverb. All right, so Matlab's got all of those. If you want to see, this is what it's going to look like once you get all of the parameters for just the multiband EQ in there. It starts to get messy, right? That's why I'm saying use the ... dots to put one thing on each line. Go ahead and just like use tabbing appropriately so you can scan down and you can see your list of all of your parameters and how you have them set up. You'll just be saving yourself a headache later on. But for every cutoff, there's going to be a frequency and a level. And we've got that for the shelf, we've got that for the bell, and we've got that for the high shelf as well. So if we want to start adding our compressor, so that's going to be another system object. So it's going to be one of our internal variables that we don't let everyone in the world know about. We do need to set it up inside our constructor here, though. So for example, we've already defined this multi-band parametric EQ. We need to create now a compressor. And Matlab has a system object for compression. We don't need to give it any default except for one thing. It's got 2 modes. One of the modes is an automatic makeup gain, which I personally like. I think, Paul, that was a little bit aggressive, or you didn't have the control of, you prefer the control of the makeup gain.
Well, so that's one of the interesting things about going back and forth and giving feedback. In version 1, which I have in my session, I'll show you this version 1 that Chris built and that I gave feedback on. It had this automatic gain compensation. And I like to have control over it, although I'll say in version 2, after you switch that, I missed that. So, this is the kind of thing, the back and forth, working human part of it, and maybe someday it's switchable. Or, because part of it's seeing how it reacts in real life applications, saying, okay, theoretically, this looks great here, but when someone actually turns a knob and sees what happens then?
That's exactly right, yeah. And that's how the process went, and that was what was fun about it. And I think we've even got plans to maybe flesh this thing out really to spec.
Yes.
And so keep an eye on BennettAudio.com, and I'll keep the code updated, and you'll be able to, actually there are already, this is a little treat for you guys for being here. There's two compiled binaries, VST3s that are already there. One's compiled for, you'll see it says x86. So if you've got a Mac that's like an Intel-based processor, you'll download that one, and it's ready to go. There's nothing to compile, there's no Matlab. You just drop it right into your plugins folder, right? /library/audio/plugins/VST3. And there's another one that's labeled ARM64. So if you've got something that's like an M1, M2, M3, you're gonna wanna download that one. I realized after the fact that once you go into that audio test bench and you click on generate, there's a little button that says universal. Universal, and it compiles for both types of chipset. So that's what I'm going to use from here on out. All right, so same story. We're going to create. What happened? Where'd you go? We're going to create a reverb. We're going to create a compressor. And once we have all of those set up, here's what it's going to look like. We're going to have, let me just scan real quick through. This is kind of like jumping to the end. We're going to have controls for our bypass, for the gain. All of these here are for the EQ, the 3-band EQ. Look, now I've started adding in controls for my compressor. The threshold on the compressor, this one's been interesting. I played with this one a lot. You can't go above 0 dB. 0 dB is your compressor's off. So like the compressor kicks in at 0 dB FS, right? It's not compressing. If you let this go really low, it's really driving it really hard. It's like turning the drive, like on an analog one, it's like turning the drive up all the way. Look, I changed the mapping a little bit on the ratio. I thought it made more sense for it to be an integer just because that's what people are used to, I think, is a physical selector that stops. Another thing I considered was mapping this thing backwards so it like was fast, like on 1176, so it kind of sweeps the other way, but I didn't do that. Messing with the attack time, boy, I was doing this in milliseconds, and 1 millisecond I somehow felt like maybe was still too high. I wish I had microseconds. So if I redid this, I would probably change my attack to microseconds. I would let it dip down, or maybe hundreds of microseconds, dip down to really fast attack. Release, I have that in milliseconds. And then the built-in Matlab reverb, I didn't even use all the parameters that it had. There was more stuff you could break out, but this channel strip plugin was already getting pretty beefy with like controls. And so I just limited it to just a couple things. It has a decay, which was an interesting parameter to break out. It's kind of like the absorption. It kind of gives you a sense of like, are they, reflective walls, or are you hanging up curtains? And this mix, so how much of the, it's almost as if you're doing a send and a return. So how much of that reverb do you want to bring in? And look how simple these are to implement. Look at this. So I'm going to pass my input through my EQ. From my EQ, I'm going to pass it through the compressor, and the out, so I'm saving that into something called into, and then that I'm going to pass into the reverb. So this is my entire DSP section. So those of you, about half of you raised your hand, you said, you've done some plug-in work before. You've never written a DSP section that's like nice and compact, have you? And then the only last trick, not trick, just, practice that I want to bring to your attention is, look at this. Every time that someone sets a variable, I'm not going to put any code there. It's like if you touch anything related to EQ, I'm going to send you to an EQ function to recalculate the EQ. If somebody touches a compressor, I'm going to send you to a compressor function. And I'm just going to, at that point, take all of that information from all of my controls and pass them over to my system object. And I'm going to do that for the EQ. I'm going to do that down here for the compressor. And then down at the bottom, somewhere else was reverb. I hope eventually one of these you can hear. Now it's really getting ugly, and this will be the fun part, because I'm going to show you how to spin up a quick GUI. If I want to hear it. All right, I'm going to kill this. And here's how I set up my cool GUI. I drew what I wanted it to look like. Come on. Let's listen. Whoops. Or not. I drew what I wanted it to look like. So I knew I wanted like this section here with a bunch of knobs for my EQ. A little bypass, drop down, or toggle, or something. I've got a big gain knob that eventually I made a little bit smaller, and I think I called it trim. I wanted a little section down here for my compressor, and then I wanted a little section over here for the reverb. So I just drew it terribly, but I drew it. And then this is the important part, though. I laid out a grid. This is going to be set up just like if you were making a table in Word or something. And so, I mean, we can just sit and count. We can be like, okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There ends up being 10 rows and 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. Why for, some of these spots, I wanted to put a little spacer. So, for example, I wanted to separate out my EQ stuff from the bypass and the gain. And once I finished the EQ, I actually wanted a little bit more space down here. So actually, this was not just one single row. That was like 2 rows right there. I want like a little buffer. I'm not going to put any controls there, but I just wanted to make space. Once I did that, I went and I labeled them all. That shouldn't say 3, right? That should say 4. It should say like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then all these are labeled. And another cool thing is once you you don't have to have one control per like grid element. You can actually have something span multiple grid elements, and Matlab will stretch it out for you. So let me show you how to put that in place. It's going to be it's going to be added into our plugin interface. You can see I've already added a bunch of other stuff here. I didn't talk about this yet. I mentioned it at the top of the program. We said, okay, you can give it the plugin name and the vendor name. So this is Channel Strip Plugin, Digital Audio Theory, that's me. Look, remember, we're passing a bunch of parameters. Before we pass the parameters, we can pass a grid. And that's where we just say, look, if I were to go through and I count these out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's going to be 10 rows. If I switch back over here, I can see, like, okay, I want a skinny row, then a fat row, skinny row, fat row, just like that. It took a little bit of trial and error, but I realized that these were appropriate numbers to make everything fit right and look good. 25, 85, 25, 80, skinny, fat, skinny, fat. So I set up the rows like that. Then I'm going to set up the columns. I knew I wanted these circular rotary knobs, so I knew my column width should be about the same as my row height. And then I knew I wanted this little buffer in here, so I added those in, 80, 80, 25, 80. Like I said, this was a little bit of trial and error, but with that audio test bench, you can do it pretty quickly. Once we have the grid set up, then all we have to do is we go back to every one of our parameters, and we insert this extra parameter called layout. And it says, where does it go? Let's take a look at this first one, bypass. I want to bypass at row 1. Oh, yeah, 1, 2. There's a little trick. The labels, like here where it has LF shelf, LF gain, bypass, those need to take up. Matlab is going to put them in their own cell. So you have to have a space for those. So notice all of these are segmented out into their own row. There has to be a space for those. So my actual control is not in this first row. It's actually, my first control is actually in this second row, 1, 2, 3, 4th column. So when I go over here to my layout, that's where I'm going to set this control. And once we do that for all of our parameters, we're going to see something that looks like this. Now, if that's where you want to end it, that's fine. Matlab gives you these cool-looking rotary knobs and sliders and little rockers, and they're not bad, actually. if you want to elevate ever so slightly, there's this you can use custom controls. And there's this really wonderful website called Knob Man Gallery, right? And it creates these things that are called film strips. If you don't know what a film strip is, it's any one of these knobs, right? But then placed at every single position from one extreme all the way to the other extreme. And the reason it's called a film strip is because at the end of the day, it stacks those on top of one another. Doon, like that, right? And so when you open up one of these files, it's this very long, like what looks like an old analog film. And people make them and put them on this website for free. So I don't know what to say. It's just one of those wonderful things. You can type in, if there's like a keyword that you have in mind, you can put it in this box. And if someone tagged their free thing that they made, you can search it, download it, and then you get one of these film strips. So for example, a real simple one. A real simple one is going to look like that. It's a switch. It only has 2 positions, on or off. The more complicated ones are going to be very tall. It's going to be hard to display here. So you can pass those. You can pass those instead of using Matlab's built-in controls. You can pass those in as a film strip, and you just give it the name of the file. Look at that. Beautiful. Last thing. The last thing is going to be the background, though, because what is a plugin without a real snazzy background? I literally just took my mouse and took a screenshot of Matlab's plugin and brought it into PowerPoint, because use what you know, and here it is. Oops. Look, that's, you saw that. This was just from the audio test bench, right? And then I just started drawing stuff around it. I'm like, oh, it'd be cool if there's like a little rounded rectangle. I used a cool font that I thought looked nice, and like this little logo for my website. And then I just put like a nice blue background. And we can pass that to Matlab way up here. We say, use this background image. Oh, and then I didn't do anything fancy. Then I just took a screenshot of that and I labeled it bg.png. And then once you pass all of that to Matlab, you get something that looks like this. Oh, thanks, guys.
All right, with this, we'll pass it over to Paul, who's ready to hear this plugin.
Yeah, so that was all super illuminating for me, because I don't know how any of, well, I do now. Before 5 minutes ago, I didn't know how any of that stuff works, because I'm on the grab the knob and turn it and try stuff side, right? But the thought that went into certain things that wind up on the plugin here, this is the version 1 of the plugin, and I'll explain why we're starting with that. This is the first thing I got. It opens up, and it's like this. Man, they're rocking over there. Sounds good. But this is what I get. And the detail, we'll kind of start, Chris, right from where you left off. The detail about how it looks and having a GUI that makes sense matters to me as someone who is going to be looking at this for however many hours and however many days, right? It needs to look relatively pleasing. I love this color blue. It needs to make sense. Things need to be laid out in a logical way so I can just grab it and dive in, right? That's the real world part of it. Go ahead.
You like that color blue?
I do. I have more than one pair of sneakers that color.
I went to I found a Pultec image, and I used my color grabber, and I grabbed that blue. That's where that came from.
Hey, I mean, Pultec's been influential in a lot of ways, including the colorways. But it looks like something, okay, I know what it is. Channel strip plugin, got it. Parameters, filter, compressor. I do like this font as well. But this stuff does matter to me, because even if I get something and if it looks cheap, my mind is going to tell me, oh, well, it's probably going to sound as cheap as it looks, right? Like there's something, we just react that way as humans. But let's dive in a little bit. Let's see what this thing can do. We are going to jump, so this is now, same session I played before, but this is the mix. And we're going to see how this audio is feeling.
A little story that must be told.
Well, I'm bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a filthy ass world, trying to get in good with the rap girls. It's hard below boulevards, yards of glass shards and torn up baseball cards. Severed heads levitate above a light source. Came for drinks but wound up the main course. Words kill and fill up the boneyards and get...
All right, so let's hold up there for a second. So we've got our audio, we're rocking, sounding good, nice and aggressive. But why am I doing whatever things I'm doing? Let's take a look. So like I said, if I get a new plugin, I want it to work on a real record. The best way to know how well it's gonna work is to put it on the most important thing in the mix and see what happens. For me, the lead vocal is the most important thing in any mix. So this is it. This is the channel strip that I'm using for my lead vocal. What I like, I asked Chris when I got this, I said, you know, the one thing that I'm seeing or that I'm not seeing here is metering, you know? Generally now we get very elaborate GUIs on plugins and our screens and show us all kind of things. But what I like about this, it's just knobs. Turn it and listen and see what happens. Does it sound good? Cool, you did the thing. Does it sound wrong? Keep turning the knob, right? It's as basic as that, but it does force me, instead of having, you know, a big graph, something like this, where I can see everything, okay, I can see what I'm doing. I'm watching as I'm mixing now, right? Here, I'm listening to what I'm doing, I'm turning the knob, and I'm just seeing what sounds right. So if I'm just watching what I'm doing, if I put 9 dB a gain up at 7K, my brain tells me, oh, you're doing that wrong because you never saw anybody do that on the internet, or you didn't learn that in music school. But we listened to the dry tracks before, and we know that that vocal was dull on top because he took off all of his processing, the artist. So I need that top end back. That was what I was missing. We'll bypass.
A little story that must be told.
Well, I'm bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a...
Now, obviously, there's some gain stuff there, and we'll get back to that in a second. But I need that mid-range. I need that top end because that's where the aggression is in the demo that we need to get back to, right? I may not make my record quite as scrunchy with the compression as the demo was, but that also felt fun. The demo had attitude to it, right? That's the goal of mixing, is to find the life that's in the record and draw that out for everybody else to hear. So I'm also compressing a good bit. And that was the first instance in of this plugin where I'm like, oh, I need to get used to how this thing works. Because this has the automatic, this is version 1, so this has the automatic gain compensation on the plugin. And that means as I compress more, it's going to compensate and bring that gain up automatically. It's all in the name, right? So if I bring this back to 0, go right to the top of the verse.
I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a filthy ass world, trying to get in good with the rap girls. It's hard below boulevards, yards of glass shards and torn up baseball cards. Severed heads
Now we got a little attitude to the vocal. It's moving, it's kind of pumping a little bit, but that's the record that we're making here. How much am I reducing the gain on this? I have no idea. If there were a meter here, like I'm kind of I compressed just a little bit and it just touches it. That's not what's happening here, but it sounds good. So it doesn't matter what I usually do. It doesn't matter what I did yesterday. What are we doing on this record today? And if it sounds good, it's right. Right? Nobody streams your records like, I don't know what that compression ratio is. I don't like this song. That's not how we listen to music. That's how we make music behind the scenes. None of your fans for any of your music has ever said this compression ratio is wrong. I'm not listening to this record. And if they say that, they're not listening for the right things. The record just needs to feel good. And so it's almost a relief. It's a release of some of the responsibility of, well, I need to really think about this stuff, let it sound good. But when it just sounds good, it's fine, but you gotta be careful. I'm gonna go over to some background vocals here. So these are my dub tracks that certain words, certain lines are emphasized along with the lead vocal. It's a regional term, but in New York we call it dubs, right? It's overdubs, but not a full double of your lead. So we are looking over here at these little bits here. These.
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course. Words kill.
So it's a little quiet, but what we have here is this is the version 1. I've got these ducked down a good bit.
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course.
So I have them ducked. I'm going to bring up the backgrounds over here. I have them ducked because with the automatic gain reduction, the output level, you see where the faders are, and then
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course.
and then you see how high the meters are, right? Because the gain, it's bringing way up because apparently I'm super squashing these dubs. It's fine because they sound rad, so it's cool, but I need to pay attention to my gain staging following that, right? This is the last plugin that's in my chain, so I can bring down the fader and get it within reason. But if there were another plugin there, I might need to trim the output somewhere in between because it's important to note this trim here is an input trim. It's not an output trim.
Right.
On version 1. So with a little bit of feedback to Chris, this is the version 2. This is the new and improved. So there are a couple things on a channel strip that I look for as an engineer. I want a high pass filter at the front of it. I do a lot of filtering. I mix a lot of things with a lot of low end record samples, for instance. All that rumble from the turntable that you get when you drop the needle on it and it sounds good, you get the cracklies and all that, and it feels great like vinyl does. You're also getting a lot of subsonic information there from the physical action of the needle dragging across the record. And if it's a hi-hat sample or a snare sample, you don't need 20 hertz worth of record rumble in there as just gumming up the works. And so I like to have a high-pass filter. I had asked about the output gain and could I have something with control there, and Chris obliged, but then also, you get what you ask for, but I'm like, ooh, I kind of miss how that just popped everything right out of the speakers as I started to compress and everything just got live and real exciting. I kind of missed that. Yeah, I got control, but so that's where I learn, or you get feedback, you're gonna get what you want, so think about what you're asking for, right? And figure out, is it what you need? Is it what you want? And I'm still somewhere in between, but that's fine. And then the other interesting thing here, it's very interesting to me that there is a reverb on this plugin. I generally put my time-based effects on an aux send as God intended. You have your track, you send it over there, it's in your mix, boom, there you are, because then you can do a lot of other things. You can put things in the same space. Yeah. But I'm testing this plugin, so we're gonna use the reverb, right? Like that's what we're doing here. And it's a cool reverb. You're right, it sounds cool. And for this record, again, everything is project focused. Sounds dope on the vocal. Let's solo the vocal, and we're gonna bring some of this up.
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course.
So this is
Words
dry.
kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds that feed in the background. The last kid went out like a bug zapper. The Red Seas parted. I saw his brain matter.
Somewhere in there, and sure, that's got probably a little more decay to it than I would normally put in a rap record. But there's a lot of stuff going in this record. Some of that gets eaten up. We can adjust our absorption to match. Like, where do we have? Match that parameter what I had on version 1. It's close enough for jazz, hip hop, whatever. And then what's interesting is that, this is a mono track. This is a vocal track. It's mono. So now I've got a mono reverb going on. And that's cool. Mono reverb is underrated in mixing. Yes, we love wide, lush verbs. Sometimes all that wide lushness is a little extra and it takes up too much space. So if you want a sense of depth, but not have it use up all your real estate in your mix, mono reverb is a great way to go. But I do want a little bit of width to my vocals. So what I'm doing here is I've got a slap delay that I'm sending to, so this is without the slap. I don't know how much stereo imaging we're actually getting in here, but
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course. Words kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds that feed in the background. The last kid went out like a bug.
so just standard slap reverb, Echo Boy, can't go wrong there. But what that's doing is that is taking the vocal, the EQ'd and compressed vocal, and also with the reverb, but it's kind of splashing it out to the sides just a little bit. And so that's in solo. In context, a lot of that gets eaten up, but I've got some width I got some width to the sound, and the reverb's out there, but it's not overwhelming. I've also got a parallel distortion track in this mix because that's the kind of person I am. Little decapitator.
Came for drinks, but wound up the main course. Words kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds.
There it is, right? So if it wasn't banging enough, let's just distort everything and blend that in and, make it sound like your speakers are blowing up. That's the goal here. Well, not everything goes there, but the vocals are going there to get a little more grit to it. Some of the drums. Let's look at the drums for a second, right? Let's jump over. So we've got, let's just go where that's gonna stay. Standard drum loop. When it's dry, it's, so here we are. And then let's bring in, of course it stops. So we got a little bit of tuck to it now, right? So this is version 2 of the plugin. So I've got output gain here, and my compressor is not doing the automatic gain, so it's not screaming hot, these drum loops. There's 16 tracks at least versus various drum loops and samples that are blending, so everything doesn't have to be loud for it to bang. We'll handle the level, but I want just that nice kind of tuckedness because there's so many drums. I want them tight and kind of punchy, not huge and cavernous. So I'm not using the reverb here, but we're compressing, bumping up the low end a little bit. Bass on this thing is nice. It's cool. Okay, we got a little tone on the bottom here, right? And I want that tone to kind of ring out of it. Want the snare on it to crack a little bit, and then I don't want it too sizzly, so we're just taking a little bit off of the top end here, right? So it's A-B again. Like, to me, that's just a little bit like, yeah, we got hi-hats, but we don't need all of you hi-hats. Let's just chill out a little bit. Yeah, we're getting a little kick, but I need a little more oomph in my situation, so.
The last kid went out like a bug zapper. The Red Sea's burning ice.
And so that's cool, but just to get that extra little, this is, so now. Right, and that's like the scrunch face, like that comes in, and then you make mean faces at strangers on the streets. This is what we want.
Words kill and fill up the boneyards and give birth to breeds that feed in the back.
And then, rinse and repeat. I've got another drum loop that goes right on top of that. We brought this in here. Similar stuff, but it's all in relation, so. This one we get a little bit of the ghost notes in the snare drum. So to get those ghost notes out, and I obviously copied and pasted, you see that a lot of the parameters are similar, but then fine tune it. I didn't need to take as much off the top here, but I wanted that crack to come out. So, it's mixing, but surprise, it's mixing, everyone. But what's great about it though is that, a channel strip is really an excellent plugin for this process because it's given me a number of things to check out, but it also gives me a lot of control over my sound. So you'll note that I've got these channel strips. I have another channel strip up above it. This is console 1. This is kind of the channel strip I go to a lot. But all I'm doing with this actually, Right here is just a high-pass filter because I started this before I had asked for the for the change for version 2, and because these are all samples and loops, I wanted that filter. But this is where, again, you ask what you get for. So I asked for a high-pass filter switch. A high-pass filter switch has to be set at a point. And this is what, at least myself, a lot of you are programmers, so y'all get this. I'm the knob pusher. I'm like, oh, well, why does the software do a thing? Why is it like this? Because a human created it up the line. Somewhere upstream of me putting it on these drums, Chris is making decisions for where things are going to happen. Because you have experience, you have nuance, you understand this is a musical place to put this high-pass filter. And so that's really why you may choose one plugin over another, because of what a human thought was the right thing to do. And I like that. Everything inside your computer, yes, it's all digital, it's all ones and zeros and bleeps and bloops. Somewhere a human created the thing and created the interface that you're using with it, and that's why you pick one thing over another. I'm using Cubase. I know it may not be as popular as other DAWs, but the humans who made Cubase did some stuff that resonates with me, and so I chose that, and the same thing with these plugins. And that's the important part of all of this, is that it's still a human exercise. It's digital, but we're all half digital anyway. I'm wearing a computer watch, you know what I mean? Like, we're here now, and so this is the combination of the two, the digital with the people. I'm running my mouse. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, jump in. I will always keep talking, but we've got a microphone over here so we can get your questions recorded. So don't be shy, join us. I don't want to talk at you, I want to talk with you. But in the meantime, let's look at one more thing that I did.
Words kill!
Nope. Let's jump to the chorus, because this is a bit of a departure from the rest of the song, but an important one, because here's where the guitars come in. And if they don't come in till the chorus, that means when they come in, it's probably pretty important that they do. But I can't have some like little meek guitars in this song that are very polite. I love polite guitars on like other stuff, but that's not what we're doing today. So the guitars gotta really get busy. So let's listen to the chorus.
If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night. If I'm dead, I didn't die right. Third rail blues all day and all night. I can stop this heart attack. I just...
Okay, so quickly we're just gonna look, we're gonna go back to the guitars. I didn't lie to you. But we've got 2 vocal tracks. I basically, they're lead vocals, they're doubled. I took the settings from my main lead track and I just brought them over there and adjusted as necessary. So I'm compressing a little bit more. This is version 1, so there's still a little more, you know, there's a little bit more to it. As I compress more, they gain up and get that aggression. And for this chorus, that's what we need. But if the vocals are rocking like that, again, polite guitars are not gonna cut it for us. So let's go over to our guitar tracks. Boosting about 3K here, right? I want that bite, and I want that bite to come through my studio monitors, my laptop speakers, your earbuds, your Bluetooth speaker right back there. Like, that's what we do, is we make things translate. And so I wanted that bite, but I didn't bring up the top end because I don't like fuzzy distortion, like with the stuff on top. I wanted it to bite but not have like the lint, like this stuff on it, you know? So not boosting that, and then a little bit of that verb, which is great on guitars. But again, look at my fader levels. Yes. These are way down, again, because of that gain compensation.
You probably know which version of the plugin you're using just based on the gain setting.
Yes, yeah. Which, you know, for today is really handy. Oh, those green faders are down low. That must be that. But I want to be careful. Sure, I delivered the mix with those faders at that level. Client loved the mix. It's been approved, so I'm good. But what it does do is it limits me just a little bit. If I need to do some automation rides or anything like that, the resolution on my fader, I'm all the way down here. If I wanted to drop it down lower, I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble because I'm just relegated to the bottom of my fader throw here, right? So I got around that by linking these with a VCA fader, and now I've got more resolution here. But ideally, if I could control the output of the plugin, like on version 2, then I don't have that problem. My faders are more in the middle of the range, right? So that's a case where I do want that gain compensation being able to switch off, and that's why, if we can figure out a switch for it, then it's best of both worlds. Because a channel strip kind of needs to be pretty flexible if it's something that you want to be able to use on multiple instruments, multiple instances throughout the record. Anything else? Any questions, please? Yes, we got a question over here. Yes, if you want to grab the microphone, hop over there, that would be excellent.
I'm pretty short, so, you can hear me, yeah? You can hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much. This is awesome, first of all. I have 2 questions. One is, can you tell us what frequency you set for that high-pass filter? Just curious what you chose as the musical frequency. And the other question is there like a how-to for those of us that don't already do this, like something that we could train ourselves to build these plugins sort of step by step?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I put that at 100 hertz.
Okay.
Then
nice.
I've got a YouTube channel.
Okay.
Digitalaudiotheory.com is my website, and there's links to a bunch of blog posts, and most of the blog posts have like a short, like 5-7 minute video that goes with it.
Cool.
And there is already one up for doing a plugin in Matlab.
Nice.
And there will be another one for adding a GUI to it. So that'll all be up there, digitalaudiotheory.com.
Okay, and these will work with Mac too, or is this just PC based?
Yeah, most of my examples are all done on a Mac, but it's going to be pretty universal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll put a QR code up at the end where you can just scan and it'll take you right to Digital Audio Theory.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Yeah, that choice. Well, we had discussed the choice of where to put the frequency for the high pass. What prompted you to choose 100 hertz versus 80 or 150 or whatever?
It was right in the middle. I mean, I would have preferred the idea of a couple different cutoff points. But this was kind of like a week ago, and we were stressing about this coming up, and I just thought, well, 100 hertz is kind of right for nothing, but bad for nothing.
But sometimes that's it, and when there's a deadline, that's often the answer.
Sure.
It's not going to mess anything up, and it's a very useful frequency. A switch would be even more ideal, but this is why things have revisions and revisions and revisions, right?
This is fascinating to hear your back and forth about the plugin design and then the actual use of it. It's great to hear. And you mentioned at some point automation, but it did make me curious about whether these plugins are fully automatable or if there are any special steps required to allow them to be automatable, and then again how that might impact the mixer or producer of the track in terms of the extent to which they're automatable.
I can quickly jump in and say I didn't do anything special. Were they automatable?
I didn't do a lot of auto. You know what? Let's find out right now.
If I'm dead in time,
Let's go to the verse.
bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million volts right where my parents met. I'm face down in a filthy ass world, trying to get bleeding the blues, I got shot to death. 10 million
Automation
volts
works.
right where my parents
There it is.
met. I'm face down in a filthy ass.
Put you on the spot there, huh? Yeah, and that's the thing. Because of what I'm doing with it, I didn't need a lot of automation because I'm grabbing these vocals and I'm squishing them pretty hard. But it's funny because it hadn't occurred to me that it might not work because I'm like, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna use this on a record, and if I need to automate, I'll automate, right? And yes, but this is the process, the trial and error process. So that was great. Yes.
Hello. So I'm primarily like a self-taught coding in my free time kind of guy, and I've messed around with audio because I'm an engineer and do all that stuff as well, and so it's a mix of interests. But I find myself getting caught up in the weeds of like doing stuff from scratch a lot of the time and not using tools, while I know there's like libraries on libraries of stuff that's built to be used to make it easy like you showed. But is there anything you can comment on or talk about of like finding a balance between getting into the weeds and sort of using presets and templates and stuff like that in terms of like learning and getting better?
Man, that's a great question. One thing I didn't really dive into with this is that it is possible from Matlab to generate a Juice project from whatever you spin up from the audio test bench. And especially if you're earlier on in that learning curve, that's a great place to jump into. Because if I look at this, there's some stuff I don't like. I don't like the fonts that Matlab puts in there. I don't like the fact that there's 17 decimal points after the the threshold. Little stuff like that's going to be super easy to jump in and start cleaning up because you can just find it. You look, if I were to pull up the code in Xcode, we would see my variable names that I created in Matlab, and so Juice in particular makes it pretty easy to change the properties of things like text box. There's some other things that I didn't like. For example, I was recently trying to make a plugin that has a backend to ChatGPT so it can auto set these settings for you, but Matlab doesn't let you make just a blank text box that's not tied to a controller. So that I have to create a Juice project, then jump into there, and but that gives you that flexibility of diving into the weeds where you need to, but also getting started with something that's like okay, like pretty quickly. I mean, this was less than a day.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
That's an interesting concept just, with mixing is like, do you do everything from the ground up, or when do you allow processes to do things? I think it's important to understand how things work, and I've spent a lot of time doing stuff the hard way so I know how it works, and then I'm like, well, I need to do this the hard way because in 1968 I was told it is also not 1968 anymore. It's important to understand the workings of things. It's also all right to like cut yourself some slack and like, oh, there's a compressor module in Matlab. We're gonna drop that in and adjust it from there, right? Like, it's not cheating. These are the tools that we have at hand. The more you use them, the more you should understand them. But, we live in the future now, so we can use future tools to create as long as we understand the how and the why behind them.
I think the beauty is also that the second Paul started mixing, everybody probably forgot that this is a Matlab workshop. The second an artist is using it, doesn't matter what it was written with, whether it was Matlab or Juice or anything, you probably didn't waste a minute thinking, I don't know about this Matlab plugin, It didn't matter. It
never crossed my mind.
Yes, exactly. So
Right.
the second he started mixing, we all forgot about this, about the music. So the beauty of something as an on-ramp such as this, where you can really scale how far you want to get into the weeds as with Matlab, is that you can directly create art at the end. And it's, it puts it at your fingertips.
Yeah, and the design, and again, that human element into creating this lets me just get going with it. I've used other plugins where I'm like, this can do a lot of stuff. There's 1 trillion parameters on here, and I do not know where to start. And I don't use those plugins because when I'm mixing, I'm in the music part, right? And I want, if I'm, okay, lead vocal's cool, but I just need a little more of this. I don't want to call up something that's super complicated. It's going to take me 20 minutes to figure out how to use it. By that point, I'm not making music anymore. Now I'm just turning knobs. And I like to get out of the tech part of my brain and into the music part when I'm mixing. So I know it's the marriage between the two, but the music part is the art part. That's the fun part. That's what all this is in service of at the end of the day, is the art. So I want to get there. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? We got one. The pressure is building. All the eyes in the room are on you. I'm not helping.
Yeah, so, hey, Paul, my question for you is how much would you spend on this plugin?
Do I know that Chris made it? No, I mean, like, first off, I would absolutely buy this plugin. Price point is hard because I feel like, let me be careful, there's a lot of plugin developers in the building today. I think there's a wide range. I feel like there are plugins that are too expensive. I also feel that you get what you pay for, and not every plugin should be $10 because I don't want my vocals sounding like $10, you know? So, I mean, it's hard to say, but I would pay real money for it, not like, oh, this is a cute little thing that I would just like spend a couple bucks for and let it bury itself in my plugin folder. I would definitely pay some real money for it because it is a real tool. As I said, my bar is, can I use it on a record? Well, the end of that story is I used it on 8 of 11 songs on this album. And it became our lead vocal sound. The artist loved it. It's like, this is awesome. Well, I don't know what you're doing over there. It sounds great. I'm like, that's right. Because you don't need to know the special sauce. You just need to know that I'm great, and then I know why I'm great. But yeah, this plugin, this was the channel strip essentially for the vocals for the album. The only reason I didn't use on those other 3 is because I didn't have it yet. I did those 3. I got it. I got CSP, and that was the vocal sound going forward. So it's for real, and it's on a real album that I got paid for and will be out in the world, and so it's a real tool. So I would pay real money for it, for sure. That's the bar there, because I'll use it again, and I'll go back to it.
I'll display those QR codes real quick for you. And one thing I always want to say about those competitions is we're not looking for winners, we're looking for participants. Because part of it and part of the prize is that, of course, you get, you know, a couple grand if you win gold. But the other thing is there's always a debrief with DSP developers that will review your stuff. So the judges are the A-listers of the industry. And so you have, you know, the real value is really not the money. It is getting to exchange with those judges. They're from the industry. You're going to be on the radar. And it's a great entry for your resume.
Yeah, I think Christoph is saying that the real prize is the friends we make along the way.
That's it. Any other questions about anything? If you can't think of one right now, you see us roam the show floor aimlessly. Just stop us, keep us from getting where we need to get on time, and ask us your questions. We're really here for you. The AAS Education Committee is for students. All we do, all the service we do is really for you to get the most out of your membership. So, you know, make it a two-way road. Ask us to do stuff for you. All right, thank you.
Thank you.